Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. And in the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Rachel Cunliffe, Deputy Online Editor at the new Statesman, and also Peter Oborne, author of The Assault on Truth and columnist at Byline Times. Thank you so much for joining us. Peter, your first trip to Sky Newspapers, so special thank you to you this evening. Let's take a look and see what is on the front of some of those papers. And the Metro leads on the vaccine milestone. More than 15 million reasons to be cheerful is the headline. The Guardian reports that Downing Street is resisting pressure from Tory MPs to end the lockdown by May. The Times says ministers are looking at ways of allowing people to go on self-catering holidays over the Easter break. While the Mirror says the Prime Minister will soon reveal an exit strategy to ease some of the restrictions. It's baby joy for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex on the front page of The Sun as the royal couple announce a new addition to the family. And that photo also makes the Daily Star splash. Whilst the FT reports on rifts in the US Republican Party after Donald Trump was acquitted in his second impeachment trial. Well, let's now speak to Rachel Cunliffe and Peter Oborne. Thanks again, both of you. Rachel, we're going to start with you. And obviously the story we've been leading with tonight, and it is on the front of most of the papers tomorrow, that this 15 million target of vaccines into arms has been reached. Good news.
It is so nice to be able to start a press preview with some good news. Yes, 15 million people have been vaccinated. That means that they have received at least their first jab, and that the government also announced that it has reached its target, beat its target, in fact, of vaccinating everyone in the first 4 vulnerable groups. So that's people over the age of 70 in care home settings, in medical settings, and with underlying conditions, and that the aim was to beat that, to get that done by the 15th of February. Obviously today, Valentine's Day the 14th, they've announced they've done it. Some wonderful news, particularly wonderful news because I remember when the vaccine rollout first started, there were a lot of criticisms of the government for not using GP surgeries and pharmacies as effectively as they could, not offering vaccinations out of hours or extended hours and at weekends, and we were looking at the beginning numbers and thinking, will they be able to reach this target, because every day they're not vaccinating enough people. But it has really ramped up, and it is a logistical triumph that we've got to this point, and yeah, very good news.
And Peter, I mean, it is obviously good news for those who've had it, and it does leave the path open to some kind of easing from the lockdown. But it's an arbitrary figure in a sense, isn't it, that the government set its own target and it has met its own target. Should we be very, very pleased?
No, it's absolutely phenomenal, and I do think we ought to give credit where it's due. I'm sure, both a lot of us have criticised the government heavily over its handling of particularly the PPE, and this has been a huge triumph. And the one person really deserves the credit, because she got absolutely hammered in the press for cronyism, all sorts of accusations, misogynistic attacks right across the press and at Westminster. That is a lady many people won't have heard of, Kate Bingham. Remember that name, head of the vaccinations task force, worked in the city, hugely attacked, did this brilliantly, made huge decisions which have saving tens of thousands of lives. Kate Bingham was accused of all sorts of awful things by a lot of journalists and a lot of politicians. A big thank you and a big apology tonight, please, to Kate Bingham.
Well, you've said her name enough times. Rachel, it was a gamble, wasn't it? And we've reflected that in the News 10 tonight, that it was a big punt that the government took on a large number of vaccines that weren't untested, and that gamble paid off.
Well, you had Matt Hancock a few days ago saying that he watched a film about pandemics, and it gave him the idea that actually what you really need to do is get as many vaccines as possible and make sure that you get your orders in early. And if you look at what's been happening in other countries, and particularly in the EU, that does seem to have paid off. The thing about vaccines is that it doesn't really matter how expensive they are. They are the only way out of this crisis. This crisis is horrendous horrendously expensive economically, in terms of human life, in terms of mental health. So anything that you can do that gives you a shot out of it ultimately ends up being worth it. And on the point about whether it's an arbitrary figure or not, 15 million, yes, it's a nice round number. That is somewhat of an arbitrary figure. But in terms of the top 4 groups getting vaccinated, those are the groups that account for 88% of deaths. And the next 5 groups on the priority vaccine list, which are the ones that the government hopes to be able to have finished vaccinating by the end of April, altogether they account for 99% of deaths. So it's not just about numbers, it's about making sure that the people who are most at risk of dying, but also the ones who are most likely to end up in intensive care and therefore put immense pressure on the NHS, they are the ones who are getting protected. And so that really, really does make a difference.
It does, doesn't it, Peter? And as there is this milestone that the government has passed, but for that milestone, so many families now know that the grandparents, those who are sick, have been vaccinated, and it's those personal stories and the personal relationships that are so important here, isn't it?
It's not just the personal stories, of course, they're wonderful, but also I think it does give a route back to the nation returning to normal. I mean, everybody sort of says behind the scenes at Westminster that things are going, they deliberately downplayed expectations at the centre of government. So we really are looking forward to maybe coming out of this terribly dark and terrible period, maybe a little earlier than we've been reflecting on up to now. There is a warning. There are going to be new mutant vaccines. Will these vaccines be able to cope with those? There will probably have to be a new wave of vaccinations next autumn. But nevertheless, this is something to celebrate.
Yeah. The Guardian, its headline is that Number 10 resists Tory demands for an end to the lockdown by May. And that really is going to be the next thing, isn't it, Rachel, that we all want to know now. When are the schools going to go back? Are they going to go back at the end of that first week in March? What kind of Easter can we have with people that we haven't been able to see?
Well, the priority has to be getting children back into schools because that is by far the most damaging impact of the lockdown restrictions, partly on their education because online learning is not nearly as effective as classroom learning, and also on their parents, on working parents who have been trying to balance full-time jobs with homeschooling. And so that absolutely has to be the priority. And I think it is good that politicians of all parties are putting pressure on the government there to have schools open again. In terms of when the rest of them can ease, the Tory hardliners are putting pressure on the government to ease all legal restrictions, get rid of all legal restrictions by the end of April, which, as I said, is when the government aims to have those first 9 priority groups vaccinated who are accountable for 99% of deaths. Now, the government has pushed back very strongly against that, and obviously it easing everything all at once, we've learned from experience, things need to be slow and they need to be gradual so that you can measure them. But I do think that the Tory hardliners have a point here, which is it was wonderful to celebrate the vaccine rollout, and we should, and we are, and that's wonderful. But the end goal of that is that we can go back to some semblance of normality, resume our lives, see our loved ones who we haven't been able to see for most of a year. People can start their businesses again, and just have to stop living under what is effectively virtual house arrest. And if the government says we have this wonderful vaccine program, but they are refusing to say when it will be no longer illegal to have a cup of tea in somebody else's kitchen, then you are going to get people rightly questioning, well, what's the point of the vaccine rollout then? So some kind of plan, some acknowledgement that lockdown cannot be indefinite, that these are exceptional restrictions for exceptional times, and that when those times improve, the restrictions obviously in turn should ease. I think that is very necessary for that pressure to be kept up.
The problem is, Peter, isn't it, if we move on to the Telegraph, which is its headline under the pictures of Harry and Meghan are that we should be able to meet grandchildren outdoors in March, that the government wants to obviously open up the country economically for schools and everything, and for people's mental health. It's the important thing to do, but they don't want to be in a position where they have to reimpose any restrictions. Do you think they've done enough to ensure that we are safe after restrictions are lifted?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think these are. I do have sympathy with the government making decisions like this at the moment, balancing the risk that the disease will come back, and as it has in the past, they made premature decisions, as we know, last year, or letting everything loose. Personally, I feel a sense maybe of optimism, perhaps that that in the spring, late spring, maybe life will start to return to normal, very largely due to the vaccines, but also the return of sun. But I don't want to criticise or second guess the government's decisions.
Yeah, I think we're all feeling a bit more optimistic as the weather gets a little bit warmer. Thank you both so much. We'll be coming back after the break. After the break, we're going to be talking about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's pregnancy announcement being compared to the final scene of a film on the front of one of the papers. Find out which after the break. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With you now, the Deputy Online Editor at the New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe, and the journalist and author, Peter Oborne. And this evening, it was announced that Harry and Meghan are having another baby. So it is obviously exceptionally great news for the tabloids. They love a royal baby story. We can have a look at some of the ways that they've looked at. The Sun has gone with this black and white image, which is the image that the couple have released themselves. Harry and Meg, baby number 2. We can also look at the Star, their take on it. Publicity-shy woman tells 7.67 billion people I'm pregnant. And we've got the Mail as well. Interesting to see how they've covered it, given that Meghan has been involved in a court case against them, but they've just played a very straight bat. Magnificent baby number 2 for Harry and Meghan. Rachel, interesting to see the takes on this. Generally, a warm reception. It's nice news, isn't it, on Valentine's Day? It's nice to have some good news to report, both on jabs and on babies.
Yeah, something positive for a change. It's been a good couple of days for the Duchess of Sussex. I was doing a paper review on Thursday night, which was obviously the day that it was announced that she's won her court case against the Mail, who published extracts of her private letter to her father, and that she won that without having to actually go to trial, and now this baby news. And I imagine that there are some people who are going to say, as is on the front of a Daily Star, hang on, you wanted privacy, but now you've announced it to the world, which there is something in that. But I know quite a lot of couples who have announced their own baby news on social media or on Facebook or Twitter, and none of them would be happy about their private letters to friends and family getting published in the tabloids. So I think that announcing that you're pregnant is kind of the thing that I don't think that suggests that you no longer want privacy, and I think it's great news.
Well, it is 8th in line to the throne as well, so there is a certain amount of public interest in a new baby on that front. Peter, what did you make of the Daily Star front page? Did you think it was a bit mean-spirited, or what did you think?
I thought they were making quite a good point, actually, this publicity averse. What's her name? Meghan is suddenly. I thought the Sun actually outplayed the Star, outplayed the Sun. The Sun sort of a really po-faced lack of attitude in its headline. The least they could have done is something like Meghan's is preggers, a bit of fun, instead of which we have it like they're reporting, the changing of the guard or the announcement, something very formal. I think that. Good for the Daily Star, I say. Well done, the Star.
They've put a picture as well at the top there of the movie Notting Hill, isn't it, that they've used the image from. There are similarities between these two images, aren't there?
Actually, you've spotted something I completely missed. Yes, dead right. That's the final scene of Notting Hill, is it not? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And that was an American and an Englishman as well. Yeah.
Harry comparable to Hugh Grant, or maybe he is. I don't know.
Well, you just don't know. I mean, Rachel, this child will be the first member of the royal family that's an American citizen in a very long time. As we spoke to Alistair Bruce earlier, he said, this child could grow up to become president.
Yeah, it could in some fantastical universe grow up to be both monarch of the UK, possibly if a lot of people abdicate, and president of the United States, and maybe could bring the colonies back to the UK and reunite that particular special relationship. That would be quite fun. I love the Notting Hill reference. I love the film, and it's a perfect Valentine's Day film. And the Star has been doing an epic run of covers recently. They have really got the art of the comic tabloid cover down. But I do think that, again, mocking them for that when she spoke very emotively and very candidly about having a miscarriage early in the year is perhaps not in the best taste.
OK. Lovely to see you both.
It's delightful news. It's just that the Star is making a serious point.
Well, indeed. Well, listen, lots more of this when we come back to you in half an hour's time. But thank you both very much for taking us through your choices at 10:30. Thanks a lot.